All right, guys. Well, welcome to this small webinar. So I'm very grateful to Artec guys for inviting me over and just basically sharing what I do and get paid as well. So it's like a very nice combination. But yeah, I'm super excited to share some of the things that I worked on, and it would be good for you to give you some glimpse of what I've been doing behind the stages and stuff like that. Can you guys see it? All good. I think you can see it. All right. Just very two lines about me. My name is Jama Jurabaev. I work as a concept artist at Lucasfilm. And obviously, I've been doing a lot of things as an artist. I design, I paint, I draw, I do a lot of 3D lately, I would say last 10 years. And also, I run a company called Big Medium Small. This is primarily where we use 3D scanners. That's why I wanted to give you like a few things that we do in the company using the scanners. Well, we're gonna dive straight into it. I'll show you like a very short, like a few short examples here. So this is like one of the products we created a while ago, and this is basically like what we do as a company. We basically create like 3D assets for artists to use. It's characters, props, environments, and all that kind of stuff. What you're seeing here is basically like one of the main characters that we created for one of our products. And it's interesting, like this one was like a very interesting example, especially for the scanners that we use here. Like the face you see here and the boots were 3D scanned. And basically for the boots, I had to put them on and go to the park, make them dirty, put a lot of mud on top of it so we can get the like proper scan instead of like sculpting on top. And for the face, this is Andre, a friend of ours. And literally we had like 5 minutes to scan the guy, and as you can see, like he ended up being a hero character in one of our products. And then obviously what happens, like I will quickly just recap on like what we do and then where this ends up being in, right? Like, so you've seen the characters, and obviously what we do as a final product, we share those with an artist, with other artists. This is obviously me. I did a few promo images here, and you can see like we can use those characters as a storytelling elements. You know, it could be part of a game or a film. It depends what you're working on. Obviously, in this case, it pretends to be like some sort of a cinematic experience. And you can see some of the elements that were 3D scanned obviously ended up being in this final product. But I wanted to go back. This is where the story starts. I know this is a very interesting image here. So like I knew very little about 3D scanners back in the day when I was starting this. But obviously, I watched a few reviews and I was like, oh, it looks pretty interesting. So, and then luckily I had like this amazing people from Europack 3D who were like introduced me to the 3D scanning world. They came over to my place. They did a few demos, and then I kind of like decided to purchase a few scanners for the company. And this were like basically I had a device, but I didn't know how to scan, and I essentially ended up having this turntable. It's basically like a Dyson fan, and it would like rotate like 45 degrees left and right, and that was my kind of like mobile turntable. But obviously, like at some point, I was like, I need a mannequin because obviously I cannot like dress myself up and scan as well. So this is a friend of mine. His name is Bob. So we essentially became very close friends with this guy. But that's how like this is the setup, you know, like nothing fancy because again, this was my home setup. Like I would use Dyson fan for the turntable, and obviously the mannequin who I will undress and dress up, put different stuff on top of it. But essentially what was important, like the other part of it, you know, where like we had an opportunity to kind of put together like different designs, costumes and stuff like that. And slowly you see me here, like I was scanning using a spider scanner. And essentially, obviously we also had a chance to scan because I think like the main part of this conversation is like how mobile the scanners are. Like being a small device, you can travel all around the world and scan people. And this is me like in Ukraine, like at one of the conferences, we had a little corner where we would scan different people. And obviously there's always someone who would say like, oh, what is this? And this is like a sort of meme someone made with me holding an iron. Essentially there was a scanner instead of it. And obviously the whole message was that like, well, why are you using the scanners if you scan with iPhone? And I was like, okay, show us your iPhone scan result. And he sent over this, which I think it's marketable. You can for a certain type of movies, you can sell this and make it happen. But obviously, you can see like this, the quality that we getting with I was getting with the scanners is this. This is like a very good starting point, especially for an artist, for a sculptor, or for a 3D artist. This is like a very decent quality, and it was done like in, let's say, in 5 minutes top. You just put like the person would sit in front of us, we will just get the scan, see the preview, and most of the time you can straight away decide like, oh, this is working, this is not working, and stuff like that. A few more examples just to show you kind of the quality. And again, these were done, each one of this is like 5 minutes, sometimes even faster, right? And then the essential work is done. Obviously, moving from generic scans, like I wanted to show you like something that we use for our products. Like essentially, like you can see, like using the mannequin and just different type of setups, I was able to create a full-size design and all scanned. And you can see on the close-ups, like the quality is pretty impressive. Yeah, like if I scroll in, you can see like even like all the kind of like little logo types and stuff like that. It's very, very cool. And this is the end product. So this, like we did this military sort of project where we did design sort of generic soldiers, because like in the movie industry or game industry, we use a lot of like soldiers and stuff like that. We felt like it would be nice to kind of design a generic soldier. And this is the final version, right? Like I'll scroll through some of this. Some of the elements here were not 3D scanned, obviously, like some hard surface, rifles, all that stuff kind of had to be made up from scratch. So artists actually modeled them, but the gloves, like the boots, certain areas of the vest and all those, that kind of stuff. You can see, like, for example, the glove here. Later on, I'll show you the kind of the original scan. But obviously, this is almost like a game-ready model, but that's sort of the final look of it. And then we can create tons of soldiers out of the assets. And this is, you can see the lineup here, we're creating all these little props and all those little pouches you see here, the gloves and the knee pads and stuff like that. Originally, they were 3D scanned, and obviously our talented artists then, they put extra effort into those. But 3D scans were like a solid starting point for us, which was fantastic. We obviously don't do only like military. It was just one of our products, and we also did like some Tokyo-inspired characters, and again, shoes and some of the props were like scanned. And now, again, full circle, you see them in stories, right? Like in this case, I did this promo images, like something probably like inspired by Predator or something like that. So you see a bunch of guys wandering in jungles. Yeah. Quickly scroll through these images. And also, like, this is something we are going to talk about a bit later, which is, like, obviously, I showed you a few examples on, from something I do on a daily basis, which, or we do at Big, Medium, Small, which is like scanning props and characters. But a lot of times, like, these 3D scanners are quite useful in a wide range of things. For instance, here, like, I did a few scans of this fabric just to see, like, because I love sculpting myself, and I was wondering, like, it's almost like getting a reference, let's say if you're a painter, like, you look at the reference to copy it. In this case, like, I would just scan some sort of coat I would have, or a shirt and stuff like that, and then I could analyze and look at the folds and stuff like that. So even if I'm not using this asset as it is, this gives me a lot of information in terms of how the fabric works and all those things. Or, for instance, like, this is another very interesting, we would scan a lot of like patches, just like put them on a flat surface, some sort of like material or like clothing pattern and stuff like that. And then you can make, for example, 3D brushes out of them. Like, let's say if you're using ZBrush, you can create alphas and stuff like that. And these are quite, you can create this stuff from scratch, obviously, or you can like use Marvelous Designer, but this process is way faster, right? Like, you can just literally find something that you have, and you can scan it and come up with something really cool. Or, for example, shoes. Like, this is actually a bunch of my shoes. I just scanned them. Of course, like, for the final products, a lot of times we modify them. We don't use them as it is, but it just gives you a very solid base, where you can just like literally like in 2 minutes get all of those done. I want to show you a few things from the design process as well, because being like quite fast. Those scanners allowed us to do a lot of iterations. For instance, this is like some of the new stuff we've been working on, and you can see here like any product is a sort of like is a result of a design process where you get some sort of a feedback or design decisions. Like for instance, you can see like the green areas, like some of the new scans we've done, right? And then the red areas that we are still missing that has to be modeled. So it kind of like quickly gives us ideas of how to prototype things. And you can see also like I will do a few paint overs or attach a few references like, oh, we need this, we need to kind of like have additional helmet or something like this. And then also this is very interesting, like as artists, like you will understand the dilemma here. Like for instance, a lot of like you would say, okay, you scan the realistic like pants or like military outfit, right? What's the artistic sort of take on this? Well, actually there is, because like depending on, because you're like a costume designer, you know, like you're putting the clothes on, and then for instance you see like this is the first iteration we did, which was scanned, and it looks realistic. However, like we all felt it looks too straight, you know, like design wise we felt like we can change the silhouette a little bit better to make it nicer. And you can see like I did a very quick sketch of how ideally we would love to see the rhythm, you know, and the kind of the shapes of the outfit. And essentially this is where like, because scanning with 3D scanners pretty fast, you know, we can just go back and for instance in the previous one, this were like the knee pads were too loose, and we were like, oh, let's just like make them less loose, so we're getting these nice shapes. And once you kind of adjust them according to this design, what essentially the fabric will kind of get tightened up, and you will get additional folds and those kind of elements. So essentially, like even if it's simple like material, you know, like simple fabric, you can actually like shape it in a way it looks designed, you know. And I remember I spent tons of time making sure like all the folds here look pleasant, you know what I mean? Like this is where the design part of it comes in, you know, you're using your artistic sort of talent, and then you shaping up the folds and stuff like that. And since like literally like let's say we did one pass of scanning and we realized, oh, it's not exactly right, then we can do another one, because it's essentially like readjusting the fabric and so on. And also trying different ideas, you know. For instance, we would put different elements on, you know, and quickly like mix them up together, see how they look like. And the more of this stuff we scan, the more we have variation and ideas to, again, these are not perfect. Like if you can look very carefully in some areas, you see like pops of different color and stuff like that. But don't forget, this is just design stage where we want to lock the silhouette, and you can see like all these folds here and stuff like that. This was all manually adjusted to make sure they look nice and it works as a character. And then what happens once we approve the design, then we obviously go and do the final polish, which means like every individual asset, if needed, has to be separated. You can see the balaclava here was like basically scanned on a person. Here we don't use the mannequin, it needs to be on the actual person, because you understand like even if you have a mannequin, like all the facial features underneath, they have to be sort of visible through the balaclava. So this is actually all like our character supervisor, we put this on, and that's what we got. And then all the individual assets, obviously we separate them, scan separately, and that's the result you see here. What is interesting, like I think we will talk about it later, but some of the techniques that we're using here, for instance, all the straps, you know, they were removed because they would get scanned, but they get a bit like it's basically easier to model than later on in ZBrush or somewhere else. But anything solid, like the boots, like the kneecaps, they scan perfectly, right? The only thing you need to consider, obviously, they have to be physically correct, right? Like if a knee pad is being wrapped around something, why don't you do this on top of of pants? You know, the reason why you do that, because you want to make sure like those knee pads could be modular, right? They could be added or removed from a character. That's why like it's almost like, let's say you photograph something on a green screen, so you can assemble it and like put together somewhere else. This was very interesting because like actually scanning gloves is very difficult, you know, like because obviously without having a hand inside, it doesn't look real, right? Like it looks very, like first the fingers have to be separated slightly so you can animate them later. But you can also, like, if you just stuff in stuff inside, it doesn't look right. They look too puffy, too kind of swollen. Like, let's say you would think, oh, I can maybe put like pieces of cotton or something like that inside, right? And I actually struggled with this one. Essentially, I ended up scanning it on my hand, which was like really surreal because like literally like I would put it on my hand and I would move the scanner. Let's say like I have a scanner here, right? Like I would just like have a scanner like this and I would move my hand, which like with photogrammetry, it would be impossible at all. But even with scanners, it was quite challenging. But I managed to do it because like Artec also comes with a fantastic software. The scanners come with a fantastic software called Artec Studio, where like it could take all the data, which we will share later, and it could just snap it together, just like, obviously, I don't know the coding part of it, but it just like takes all the duplicated surface. Because like when you move, essentially, like your fingers would move slightly, but the software does it pretty well. And you can see it here. I mean, like this is not the cleaned up version of it. It's pretty impressive how they did it. And this is not the final one, but I did a little bit of texturing on this one. You can see like the problem with the original scan, there's no material difference, right? Like every material, like as a diffuse, the color map is obviously correct, but there's no like roughness map, metallic features, and then you just need to separate those and do a little bit of paint work on top. But I think it's pretty good. Also, we did scan, obviously as a human base, we also, like for our characters, we scan people. So sometimes it could be just like a head scan. A few examples. Obviously, when you scan something, it's like super high poly. Like if you look at this image, like you see here the material and you can see all these little like imperfections and stuff like that. It's a very solid base, right? And again, like literally this took around like 5 minutes. This is like super quick. You just put this object on a turntable. But there are a few tips that I figured out. This is it gets very interesting. Like initially, I didn't know that like what color range is better to use for scanners, and obviously something around this sort of value is good. It's less about the color itself, but it's more about the value, because like the darker the value is, I don't know obviously how scanners work precisely, but I would imagine there's some sort of a grid projected on the surface, right? And if the surface is too dark, obviously the grid is kind of less visible. So this sort of any whiter is also a problem. Let's say like if you have a sunny day and you have like a very bright surface, then the grid also blends with the background. So essentially, like by trial and error, I figure out this is the best color. But this doesn't, as you, Mike, said, it doesn't restrict you artistically, because I believe like all we need is just the basic like geometry information, because then the texture and all that stuff, we will have tons of artistic choices that we can make later on. And I will show you the final result and you will see what I mean. So once we scan it, obviously the artists, they use their talent to retopo this, right? Because any game or film asset, most of the time it needs to be reduced in polygons. Obviously, if it's going to be animated, you need to fix the topology and stuff like that. So this is where artists take over. And then they do their magic, right? So one of our brilliant artists here, Big, Medium, Small, she took this asset, she obviously retopologized everything, and then you need to unwrap it as well. This was done, and then you put this into Substance Designer or Substance Painter, and then you paint the textures. So this is how it looks with the textures painted, and that's what I was talking about. The original asset obviously was sort of this mid to sort of sepia color, mid-value sepia color, but you can see like after we get the scans, after it goes through the artist's talent, you can create different designs. You can start like playing with the storytelling. Essentially, that's the ultimate thing that we do in games or films. And I can show you the final render. You can see like this is just super nice. Yeah, like even every time I see this, I go like, oh wow, it went from like this like the sort of the real product, and then it got scanned, and then it got tweaked, and you see like the artist was able to paint the roughness and to make it look like it's a sort of special operation boots. I have a few more examples here. Like again, sometimes obviously with boots you don't need anything inside. Most of the time you can just scan them as it is. But then sometimes like I would scan them on top of a mannequin or a real person. You can see the vest here was scanned, and then it went through this ZBrush process when artists clean it up, obviously replace all the all the small elements, and then separate the assets. Then it goes through retopo, and this is the final product. You can see like, yeah, you can just tell like how much we kept of the original sort of design, and details and all those things. But obviously, there's quite a lot of talent involved in this one. Some like again like the boots previously, the knee pads that we showed, the pants, and it's all like coming together. Again, this is sort of like to show the lineup. We do the retopo. So this is actually already the low poly model. So essentially, this is how it looks when we scan it, more or less. But underneath it, you obviously do the standard process, right? Like you retopologize it, make sure that we have lower poly count, and then you bake the normals. So essentially, once you do all those steps with the materials, it looks like this. And yeah, here goes the sort of final look of it. This is where we kind of assembled everything together, and I can show you like a few renders here. So yeah, you can see like everything. Obviously, as I mentioned, not everything is scanned, because like as an artist, you know exactly sort of what are pros and cons. Like for instance, like you can scan the helmet, but I found the problem with helmet, the design we want like a specific look of it. So a lot of times we basically, like I would say most of the time, are design driven. Like we don't want just like to recreate what already exists, but we want to give it like our artistic license. And that's why like we would consciously say like, hey, some of the props we can scan them and tweak, or some of them we can like model them from scratch. For instance, the radio here was modeled because like we don't want, like a lot of times you also don't want to mess with the copyright issues. So like some of the generic assets, you can scan them and use them, but something custom, you should definitely make it from scratch. And that's exactly what we did here. And yeah, I'm very happy about this. You can see like there's a lot of like, and then obviously you can, once you scan certain elements, you can, with the texturing and all those things, you can add additional like dirt pass and just basically make it more realistic and stuff. So this is where we are at with this product. But now I also wanted to go into sort of technical aspect of it. So I'll show you a few, like this is obviously how it looks in Artex Studio. Let me just open the elbow pad for you. Yeah, so when you scan things, obviously initially you're scanning this point cloud. I might talk in some technical things because I'm just a user, but basically when you scan something, like you can see here, like it's getting scanned, and sometimes like you don't need to scan it in one go. That's what I talked about. You see like over here, I've got two scans, like they pretty much overlap, right? But why do I do that? For instance, I scan it once, and then I decided like, oh, you know what, like I'm missing some areas and some parts. I can do additional scan. And like, again, we meant to do a separate webinar on this, but basically like Artex Studio is so good at like combining different scans, like for instance, you can take several parts and like snap them together. Then you can use like this registration mode where like you can see a lot of like, sometimes what would happen, there would be like elements floating around, which also like snap together when you run it through registration, because like the way this operates, it knows like if you can define how far the points are offset and all those things. There's like tons of things. That's why we need another session on this, but that's mainly the process. And once you do that, you fuse them together, which is here called a smart fusion, right? So you basically like have different settings where you can define how heavy it's gonna be, like, but a lot of times like I don't go super heavy, like because this is like a relatively small asset. So we've got 3 million polygons here. And again, one of the things to keep in mind here, you want your asset or whatever you're scanning to be physically sort of correct according to where it's going to be used, right? If it's a knee pad or like a shoulder pad or like an elbow pad, obviously in case of an elbow pad, it has to be wrapped around the hand, right? But then ideally you don't want it to be so narrow. That's why like here, I think this is like a waste basket that I had in my office. So I just like wrapped it around the waste basket just because I wanted like to make sure I have a creative space, like freedom in case if I wanted to be less curved or more curved, at least some curving had to occur. That's why I have it like this. And once you do that, obviously, let me see what else do I have here. Yeah, this is the knee pad, again, using the same technique. You see, I'm not capturing the straps. As I mentioned before, the straps, it's not like they scan pretty well, but because they have to be separated on the other side, it's usually better if you just not scan them and then like in ZBrush add them, because usually you would have a lot of like straps from previous projects. Like all we actually need is this area, right? So, and then when we fuse them together, you can see it's like really nice. And again, you see over here, you see some holes here. You can either use it as it is, but a lot of times you can also like use the software to close the holes. And essentially, like as geometry, like if you go just to scan, like Studio is pretty good at doing that. Like it's not perfect, obviously, it has a bit of errors here and there, but overall, like this is like super solid place to start, because like you can see like there's just a little bit of stuff that is missing, which is later on it has to be refined. But overall, this asset could be just straight away given, could be given to an artist. They will do the retop, the texturing and stuff like that, and it would work. But I also wanted to show you the actual process. So like I have this elbow pad here, which is basically like I exported it from Artec Studio and put it in here. So what happens next, right? Like obviously, how do you clean this stuff up? Again, artists use different softwares, but I use 3D Code just because it's using voxels. For instance, I don't know the technique in ZBrush how you would do that. I'm pretty sure it's kind of similar. But in 3D Code, basically the way it works, like because 3D Code has a voxel-based sort of technology, essentially what it means when, like, I have this tool called vox hide here. So when you hide something, because like ideally what we want to do is separate this, right? Like, so we've got this waste basket, obviously. We want to cut it out and make sure our asset is isolated. What you can do, you can hide certain elements, but then you go, oh my God, I deleted part of it. I know I told you not to be bothered about this straps here, but let's say we want it, right? The way this works, like, is super smart. So vox hide in 3D Code is basically like if you ever use Photoshop, right? In Photoshop, you have a mask, right? Like you create a mask and you erase in or erase out the mask. Same here, but this time around, instead of working with like flat image, it works as in a 3D model, on a 3D model. So essentially, if I press Control, I can bring back some of it. And you can see, like, I don't need to be super precious about this, because at any point, I can bring back a lot of this, you know. And it also depending on the angle as well, because like I can pretty much like rotate my camera, you know, like this, and then I can slowly, like, yeah, with Control, it brings it back. And again, you can change the mode. Like, let's say, obviously, right now we're doing in the free lasso mode. You can also get a little bit of and like polygon lasso as well, right? And then it's way more precise. So basically, like, you can just go and start deleting it. I love it. I like, most of the time, if I have to clean up scans, I do it in 3D Code, because like I said, with the Control pressed, you can bring back some of the elements. You see, like when I do that, some of that information is coming back. And essentially, like, you are not worried about like messing up your model, right? Like, it's already pretty good that you can do this, but if there are any places where you mess it up, you can bring it back like this. So let's say, like, for some reason, like I did this, right? And you don't panic. Basically, with the Control, you can just bring it back. So voxels are fantastic. And obviously, this is not a textured model, but actually you can bring in textured model and pretty much do the same, you know, like you can just separate it, separate this model as it is. Yeah, so that's how, like, I would like delete the unnecessary parts. But also sometimes what would happen, you would have, like, let's say if I have this pants over here, right? Obviously we already know, like, the top part, right? Like we can just delete it, right? Like this. And then using vox hide and stuff. But also, like, let's say I've got the boots right here, and let's say if I wanted to separate the boots from the pants, but I wanted to keep those. So essentially what you can do, like, there are a few ways you can do it. You can either like split it, like there is a split tool where you can do the same and it gets splitted, or you can actually like vox hide it, because again, I think this will be pretty straightforward, because it's just, but still you will have some areas where you want, like, yeah, like for instance, this area, you see, like I want from a different angle to hide a bit more, right? And then we want whatever was separated, we want it kind of back, but this is a separate object. So what we would do, we would say like separate hidden volumes. And you see now that asset came in as a separate asset, which is just amazing, because a lot of times what would happen, like let's say we created this asset, but then later on someone decided to, what do you call it, to separate the knee pads, right? So we can essentially do what we did before, right? Like we can go ahead and like start separating it. So I think we should do it the other way around. So let's say we can do it like this. So like just from this camera view, we can separate this part, right? And then I'll rotate my camera and continue with this one. I don't think I will spend. I don't think I need to do the whole thing, but I think you will get the point. So let me just quickly do this very quickly. Yeah, you see, like, because I'm hiding this model from different angles, I pretty much can do this for the whole thing. And do a little bit here. So it's not perfect, but I think you guys got the point. So, and like for instance, obviously all the back stuff got disappeared as well, but you know, with control we can bring back that stuff, right? So we can just do that. Yeah, so it looks like, and then maybe we should separate this part, right? So it looks like the knee pad was sort of isolated and separated, right? And then all we need to, obviously if you're doing this properly, you'll like make sure like it's like much nicer inside. And then, yeah, you do the same thing. You go ahead and then you can either delete the hidden, sometimes you want that, but in this case, obviously, we just want to bring that back, right? So boom. And when we do that, you see the knee pad came in as different junction. And now you can move it. And now you can basically like clean up the knee pad, make it as a separate asset. So you might ask like, well, you have a giant hole here. Obviously, sometimes like you obviously need to sculpt it up. Like for instance, if I want to restore this, then obviously I'll have to sculpt it up. So which is also doable, you know, like we can start like, you know, just inflating this area and then is like closing the gap and stuff like that. But obviously if this was a separate asset, you don't need to do that, right? But in this case we decided to do it this way, right? So I can do it like this, and then from here it's basically there are no cheats. It's just basically being a sculptor or an artist, you will start like refining these areas, you know, like introducing sort of the fabric, the folds and all that stuff. So obviously this takes way more than 10 minutes, so I'll skip that part. But at least like for now, we have two separate objects, right? Like we have the knee pad, and once we do kind of refine everything, we can snap it back and it will look nicer. So when you're creating like a character, you're giving your like users or people who would purchase this model ability to like toggle this on and off. But the scan overall, that's what we talked about. It gives you like fantastic solid base, you know, like, can I sculpt this from scratch? Possibly, but it's not, the point is not that, you know, like I would love to make sure I have something that is a very solid base to start from, you know, like I can take this one and I can keep refining it and doing all those things. Yeah, that's pretty much how it works, you know. But you can see the scans are really like, this is the original scan just imported. It's pretty clean. Like sometimes you would get like, yeah, like for instance here, you see there's, oh, that's where I cut it, right? Like, so it's all good. It was actually me who messed it up, so not the original scan. But let me see what's the other example. No, this is the examples I have so far. And you can see after you do this, and obviously artists will take this over, the scan is just the starting point, you know. That's how it speeds up the initial step, where we basically like taking something existing, scanning it, putting it into artistic pipeline, then we clean it up, then do retopo and do all the magic that artists do, and we ended up having something really cool. All right, I think this is it, guys, from me.